Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. Today I'm back for another installment of my Question the Narrative series, and I'm going to be talking to you about giants again, just like I did last week. There is a lot of stuff out there about giants. I thought that I would do maybe 2, maybe 3 videos on giants, and I keep just coming across so much information, and I don't want to drive this into the ground for you and bore you, but I also want to make sure that I'm presenting enough evidence to you that you might realize why it is that I believe that we may have been lied to about this. So just keep in mind that what I present to you here is by no means complete. Don't think of this as, like a complete documentary. This is just me going over with you what I have come across in my research with giants. And it's more like a jumping off point for you if you wanted to get started. So what I originally wanted to talk to you about today was North American giants and all of the stories about them. These are actual newspaper articles regarding giant bones that have been found in North America. So as we can see here, beach giant skull unearthed by WPA workers near Victoria. Giant skeleton found. Mystery still surrounds Ohio County bones. Giant skeleton found out west. And we can just go down here further. Unearthed giant with horns. And as you can see, there's just giants. There's dozens of these stories. And I wanted to go over some of them. Look at this, 11 feet tall. I wanted to go over some of these stories in more detail with you today. But I actually figured that I had better go over why it is that we never hear about these things, because this is kind of important. This is something that you would think that we would have heard about. Right here we have top 10 giant discoveries in North America. And this here, these are all of the places that there are reports of giants. So yeah, here's some more newspaper articles, and then it starts going over all of the stories of giants that there are. Well, not all of them, but the top 10. The reason that I'm not going too much into them, again, is because I really thought that it was important that I present to you the whole reason that we have not learned about these things. The Smithsonian has very much to do with this. Now, I talked about them in my last video. I showed you a bogus article that was supposedly the Smithsonian admitting to dumping all of the giant bones, because that is the story. It is the story that the Smithsonian actually took a bunch of artifacts and just dumped them in the ocean, artifacts that they, didn't want the public to see. And now, whether that story is true or not, it is definitely the case that the Smithsonian has not been telling us the truth, not just about giants, but about a lot of things. And the problem is that when we see Smithsonian, people always look at that and think the Smithsonian will always tell us the truth about everything. And we automatically bow down to them because it's that whole technocracy scenario. We don't ever think that the Smithsonian would do anything against the truth because it is supposed to be about education. Here's the thing, though. The Smithsonian has been caught several times not telling the truth about things. For example, even the founder of the Smithsonian, James Smithson, they have his age wrong on the plaque outside of the museum. It says that he passed away when he was 75 years old, when he was actually probably closer to 64 years old. That sounds trivial, but the thing is that the Smithsonian, they have that in their literature. In their literature, it says that James Smithson passed away at 64, but they never went about changing that at the museum. So people going to the museum see it as, well, he passed away when he was 75. They have no plaque saying that it was a mistake, nothing. And again, it seems trivial, but if they're not telling the truth about their very founder, if they think that it's not important enough to be, clear with the people who are going there, what else is it that they think might not be important enough to tell us? And this isn't even the only thing. It's by far the only thing. There have been lots of outcries over their Native American displays because they said that they are not telling the Native American story accurately. The same thing goes with African history. There have been people saying that their African history is not being displayed accurately. And who can forget their most recent Debacle, Smithsonian Museum apologizes for saying hard work and rational thought is white culture. I mean, really, it's evident that the Smithsonian is not right all the time, and they don't always tell the truth all the time. So I think that's something that we have to kind of get out of our heads, is that they are always going to say exactly what's right, and we should always trust everything that they say. So the last video I talked to you about the Mound Builders, and these are the mounds. They're found throughout North America. Now they're found worldwide, but I'm talking specifically about North America today just because we are mainly focusing on the Smithsonian Institute and how they have been hiding these things. And we did talk about in the last video about how, yes, there are stories that there were the bones of giants found in many of these mounds. Well, there is where that right here is where someone by the name of Major John Wesley Powell comes into play. So John Wesley Powell, he was a geologist, U.S. soldier, explorer of the American West, and a professor at Illinois Wesleyan University, and he also worked for the Smithsonian Institution. He was actually funded to explore these mounds by the Smithsonian. And so what happened was he did not want people to be talking about the giant bones. He knew that they were found. I'm sure that he saw the giant bones, but he did not want that to be known to the public. So he would just come out with stories saying that, well, if there were any anomalies that were found, they were just, if it didn't fit with evolution, then they couldn't possibly be real. So his theory was always going back to evolution, and then he would try to start talking to people about mythology, and he would try to make people afraid to talk about the giant bones that they found because they were afraid that they would be seen as crazy. So you might be wondering, well, why would the Smithsonian not want people to know about giants? Well, first of all, there are giants in the Bible. And so if you are able to just relegate giants to the world of fairy tales, it's a lot easier to write off the Bible. In addition to that, it completely goes against the theory of evolution. And I really think that that's a huge part of this. It does not mesh with the whole idea of humans evolving over time in a straight line. And that is really what I think they are hiding, is that, yeah, we've got evidence here that the theory of evolution just might not be true. And they don't want people to know that. So, and the problem is that since this is the Smithsonian, there are a lot of universities, colleges, educational systems. They will follow whatever the Smithsonian says, and so they will then teach that to their students, so people are not hearing the truth about these bones that are being found. So another way that he actually, and now I'm talking about Major Powell, got people not to want to search for these giant bones is because he said that it would be a waste of funding, that instead of, looking for the things. Now, he never specifically came out in public and said giant bones, but he alluded to them quite frequently. And what he basically said was that he didn't want to waste money that could be spent on studying Native Americans. And he also said that it would be hard to study any other, I don't remember the exact term that he used, but sort of maybe human being, again, meaning the giant, because we wouldn't know where they had lived and it hadn't been mapped out. And the problem is that, Wesley Powell, he was an explorer. So why wasn't he exploring? Why wasn't he looking into these things? He just wanted to automatically say, oh, it's not worth looking into the giants. But that is what happened. And that he also said that he wanted to not dig up underneath any of these mounds to look for giant bones, because he said that it was out of respect for the Native Americans. And, if that is the case, then okay, I believe that it is important to respect the Native Americans, but at the same time, is that really what he meant? The U.S. doesn't really have a great track record with being respectful to the Native Americans, so I have to just stop and think, is that really why he doesn't want people digging in the mounds, or is it because he doesn't want them to find the giant bones that are there. So this has actually been talked about several times contemporarily. It's not, these bones are not just being found back in the 18th and 19th century. Now, the reason that we hear about it a lot more then is because we did not, up until a certain point, have all of the censorship of this information. Nowadays, it's common to have censorship going on. So we're just not used to hearing these stories anymore. So then when we do see, newspaper articles like this, a lot of times we might just think, oh, well, that's not true. They were just, superstitious people. But no, there are contemporary findings of giant bones still today. So here's an episode of America Unearthed. I'll leave a link in the description box. And in it, there are people, I don't remember what state they're in, but they have unearthed giants up there. And they had someone come in, again, from the Smithsonian to say that they were not giant bones. And what ends up happening is that when people call the Smithsonian in to look at these giant bones, is they are confiscated, and the Smithsonian will then pretend that they were never found. So in this episode here, the man that Scott Wolter went to see, he was very frustrated at the end because he knew that it was a giant that was in there, and the people at the Smithsonian tried to say that it was only the bones of someone who was 5'3". I mean, completely condescending and completely untrue. Now, one thing that I forgot to talk about that I think is really important is Powell actually came up with something called the policy of exclusion for the Smithsonian Institution. And this is something that they followed tooth and nail, because Powell ended up being one of those people. He was a technocrat. Everyone wanted to listen to what he had to say. So what he came up with, it said the museum established the Powell Doctrine as a literal official policy to exclude any and all alternative evaluations of the mounds, bones, pictographs, and human origin hypotheses, regardless of evidence. Any perspective, no matter how scientifically sound, would be snuffed out under the suppressive abort button of the doctrine. After 1907, it would not matter what was found in the ground. The policy was solid. No opinion other than Powell's would ever matter to the Smithsonian again. Much documentation has been collected that follows an unscrupulous trajectory from various archaeological digs to the Smithsonian as research teams are submitting their finds to the museum for study and/or display, and the trail goes dark at that point. The bones the Smithsonian is receiving are not making their way to the museum floor or laboratories, and nary is a word uttered that they were ever submitted after they were unearthed. Those who contribute the bones to the museum do so in naive trust that the Smithsonian will appeal to the government for grants and additional research funds. But because of the policy, the buck stops there, and that in turn affects the budget allowance for universities to follow up with any kind of field study for tomorrow's generation of scientists. They don't want people to know about this. I don't think that they actually care so much if we look into this now, because it's at the point where you're just considered a conspiracy theorist if you talk about things like giants. But there is evidence. There are bones. There are giant bones. So that completely takes away the aspect of it being a conspiracy theory. It becomes a fact when you have evidence behind it. And the thing is that they assume that most people are never going to bother looking into that because, again, no one wants to be called a conspiracy theorist. No one wants to go against the narrative because only crazy people do that, right? So anyway, next week I am hoping to do another one on giant. This time I will get more into the North American giants and we'll get into some more detail about the stories. But I really wanted to go over this with you about the Smithsonian because it's important that we have got to realize that the Smithsonian is not this pristine institution that people believe. They can and do cover things up. They can and do change things that they don't agree with. And we need to start thinking outside the box, and we need to stop thinking of the technocracy as God. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that.